Hey guys, this is Karen from Blue Rooster Farm, and today we're ready for part 2 of our winter bird stocking by Tilda. And we already have the panel made. Now it's time to make the stocking. So if you want to see how this is done, stick around. Thanks for sticking around. Well, today we're doing our second part of the winter bird stocking. We've got the panel, we've got all of this complete. Now we need to add a couple of pieces to it to extend it and make the foot portion of it. And we're going to be putting it together to make a quilted stocking. And this is going to be so cute. So if you haven't already downloaded your free pattern, I have a link to Tilda's website where you can download this free pattern, and it's called Merry Little Christmas Winter Bird Christmas Stockings 4 colors. And you'll find that in the free patterns, and the link should take you right to where those patterns are. So download your free pattern, and I'm going to be walking you through how to piece this and put it together so that you can make your own. Now, I've already taken one of the blocks that I had made earlier, and I had made one of Tilda's Santa blocks. If you are new to my channel and are just seeing this for the first time, Tilda has a really pretty quilt and a calendar, like an advent calendar, called Dear Santa. And in that, she has some really pretty blocks. And this Santa block is one of them. And he actually goes into a bigger block that has a Christmas tree. And I decided to take those separate blocks and make stockings with them. So not only am I going to have the winter bird stocking, I'm going to have this Santa Claus stocking. And I have finished it up very similar to the way she has finished hers. I have made this one just a tiny bit larger than the winter bird stocking. Not much, but so I had to adjust a few things. And so I'll show you what I did to adjust those. Then I also am in the process of putting together the Christmas tree stocking. And I've got it to the point where I've got it sandwiched in its layers, ready to machine quilt. And I've added the piece, I've traced the foot, and I just need to quilt it, and then I'll cut it out and bind it, and it'll be all done. So I've got that just about, well, I shouldn't say just about done. As long as I can get the quilting done, it's just about done. And then I've started Mrs. Claus. Now this is a block that is not one of Tilda's. After I decided to make these into stockings, I thought I need a stocking for myself. I've got a stocking for my husband and my 2 sons. Now I need a stocking for myself. And I thought, where is Mrs. Claus? And so I just designed a Mrs. Claus block that I thought fit perfectly with Tilda's Santa and Tilda's Christmas tree. And so here it is. And I have already sewed the toe and the base part here, and I've added just another strip, and I'll share with you what I've added in case you're wanting to make one of these too. So I've got all of them started except for my winter birds. I wanted to wait until we got to do it together. So I'm going to bring you down to my cutting table, and we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go to this page right here in your pattern, and it shows the fabrics and the cuts, and it also shows this piece here, this piece here, and this piece here, and it tells you all the measurements right there. And so what I've got here is I've got my measurements all cut out, and I just need to put these pieces where they belong. Let's see, it looks like that's gonna go there. This one's gonna go up here, and this one's gonna go down here. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to go to my sewing machine. Let me move this one right here first. And I'm going to put this one right sides together if your fabric has right sides, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch away, and I'll put pins in both ends just to make sure one doesn't slip and we have a edge sticking out. And then I'm going to do the same thing here with the piece that goes at the base. I'm going to put right sides together, pin it, and then sew 1/4 inch away, and I'll bring you right back. And there we have the top and the bottom on. Now we're going to take the toe portion and we're going to match it up with this bottom corner. And we're going to put pins here, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from the edge. And here we have all of our pieces added. Now I pressed toward the fabric that I added on all of these pieces, and you especially want to on this one, because if you press it the other way, this right here is going to go under, and then of course you're going to have this right here sticking up and out. So go ahead and be sure you press it toward the pieces you added. Now that we have this all pieced together, it is ready to add our template. Now in Tilda's pattern, you're going to find a template for the bottom portion of the stocking. And what you want to do is you want to print this off. And she gives you directions on how to do it. And basically you want to print it at 100%, and it's going to take up 2 sheets of paper. If you print it fit to paper, it's not going to be the right size. So be sure if it's not looking correct that you find in your printing selection when you're printing it, print 100%. Now, you can tell that you've got it printed correctly by looking at this little ruler here. And if you just take one of your, grab one of mine here, one of your sewing rulers and place them on that ruler. 1 inch on your ruler should be 1 inch on this piece of paper, and they match up just perfectly. So check it out to make sure you have your stocking the correct size. Now she has the stitch lines and she has the cut lines, and I'm going to do it just a little bit differently because I don't want to have it all cut out when I'm quilting it. I want to quilt it first and then cut it out. And so what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to lay it here, and she says 16 inches to the edge of the fabric at the top of the stocking. So basically what we need to do is we need to center the, or place this so that we have 16 inches. Let me get my ruler set the right way. 16 inches. Here's 16 inches right here. At this line right here, I need to have this line. So I'm just going to set it so that's 16 inches away. Then I'm going to just place this, and it should be from edge to edge pretty close. And I'm going to set it, and I want this to be parallel with my stitches. Okay, so if you're using a ruler like this, you can lay this at 16, match up your 16 edge right here on that line. Then when you lay this one here, you can just line up that line with the edge of your ruler, and that way you know that you are going parallel to your stitches on here. That's the way I do it. So once you know that you have it in the right spot, we can put a couple pins in it. And just pin it without moving the paper. Now, if you want to cut it out and follow her instructions, by all means, you decide what you want to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trace it on the fabric, and I'm not going to use a friction pin because I'm probably going to be pressing this at one point. I'm just going to use a lead pencil. If I use a marker that disappears with air, inevitably I will do it and it'll disappear before I finish. So I am going to use just a regular pencil, and I am just going to lightly, this will all be in the seams, lightly trace around it. Now let me go back over here. My printer kind of jammed up on me a little bit. I'm going to extend this a little bit because I know that my printer left a little bit of that off. So I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay, there we go. So now I have the outline and I can take this off. And this does, like I said, come in 2 pieces, and she shows you just glue or tape it together, and I just put some tape on mine. So we're done with that for now. So I have my outline, I have my pieced stocking, and now I need to quilt it. So what I did, let me move this aside here. So what I did was I cut a piece that will fit this whole piece, and then I have 2 pieces of batting, and I've got 2 pieces of inside fabric. And so let me grab that, and all of them are cut to this size. All right, so we're ready to make our quilt sandwich, and we're gonna have 2 quilt sandwiches, one for the front piece and one for the back piece. And so I have batting, I have my panel, and I have my inside of my stocking fabric right here. And I'm just using a white fabric. You can use whatever you want. It's not going to be seen except when people are grabbing their stuff out of their stockings. Now, when we go to put this together, what we're going to do is we're going to take and put our stocking panel, the one that we have pieced together, right here, and just make sure there's about even amount of batting all around. Then we're going to put on our, let me set this aside here. We're going to be putting this on the bottom and just lay it out flat. Not sure what that is. I'm gonna put that over here so it gets cut off. Okay, so we're gonna then put this right on top of this. And these 2 pieces should be the same size, the batting and the backing, and so they should line up. That way we know that everything's going to be in the quilt sandwich, okay? So then what I wanna do, you can pin this before you machine quilt it, or if you're wanting to do this on your long arm, you certainly can. In fact, I was thinking of doing this on my long arm and having all of my blocks laid out on, I'll just, having my backing be this and having them all laid out plus the red and white stripe. But I wanted to make one first to see if it went together okay. And then it's like, well, then I'll be making this one. And so it just, I'm just going to use my sewing machine to quilt, and it's fine. These go together pretty quickly. So now what we want to do is we need to either pin it or use spray-based, or we can use our glue stick. And some people even use the Elmer's glue where they water it down and they brush it really lightly on the batting, and they like that method too. So I think what I'm going to be using is a clear Elmer's glue stick, and I've just started trying these. Now at the end of the school year, they had this thing right here, this big, had 6 disappearing purple sticks and 6 scented sticks. And why they would make Elmer's glue scented. As a teacher, we spend all day trying to keep our kids from eating the glue. And now they're scenting it to make them really want to eat the glue. I do not understand these companies. They do not know what it's like to be a mom or a teacher, I guess. You know, and even wanting to put this on like chapstick, I'm thinking, I wonder how many kindergartner and first graders smell this. This one's called chocolate brownie. Smell this and think, I think I'll put that on my lips. Well, I guess the ones that are talkative, that would be probably a good thing. But anyway, this blew my mind when I saw it. I thought, oh, those poor teachers. So anyway, this is clear. And I am going to try it. And I've been using it for a little bit and I haven't had any trouble. I haven't washed anything with it in there, but I don't see it being any problem. So if you happen to see this and you want to give it a try, by all means, give it a try, but I'm not promising you anything. I'm trying to see if this one does not say washable. So if you are using this, it may not wash out. I don't know. But I'm going to use it for my stockings because they're not going to get washed anyway. So I'm going to try chocolate brownie. Let me smell it. Well, it doesn't have a whole lot of smell. So I'm going to use this. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up my stocking and I'm going to put it on the batting. And again, it's just like that. And it goes on clear. And don't yell at me if you don't think this is a good idea. It works for me. And then once I have, and you don't even hardly see it on there. Once I have it on, I'm going to lay that down. And a while ago when I said don't use friction pin, this is why I'm going to be heating this up a little bit to get that glue to adhere. So then I'm going to go over here, pull it back, do the same thing. And if you feel like this doesn't work for you, just go to whatever method that you use. And really the only thing I've used this on so far is the stocking that I just made and some binding. That's all I've used it on. So it's not been anything that I worried too much about ruining. So there we go. So I'm going to take this to the iron, give it an iron, and then we'll see if it's stuck. Okay, I've got it ironed, and let's just see. Feels pretty stuck. That's right here. It does smell good when the iron hits it. I could smell the chocolate. So maybe we'll just put some on fabric and iron it to make our room smell good. Okay, so now we're gonna flip this over and we're gonna do the same thing with this side. And of course I've got stuff all over this. Make sure I have, sometimes when you're using the white fabric, you can see any little thing on your batting through it, so be sure you make sure there's nothing stuck to your batting. And of course this is not going to be seen, but still I kind of like it to look nice. Okay, just match up all edges again and let's do the same thing. And this is not a very big piece to machine quilt, so you really, you know, if you put a few pins in it, you'll be good. But this just keeps your stitches from getting little pleats in them, especially the back, that you're not, when you're not watching the back, of course. Sometimes you get those little surprises that you got a few pleats in your backing. And this just keeps it in place. And I'm just doing a little bit at a time so it doesn't dry out. because I'm not putting very much on it. And have you ever noticed too how it looks like you have a really big tube of it, but it's only halfway full inside? Yeah. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to press it, and when I come back, I will bring the back portion of our stocking. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the back. I'm going to put the light fabric, which is the lining, the batting, and then the back of the stocking fabric, and just sandwich those together. Okay, now I'm going to take this to the iron and iron it, and I used up one glue stick, but really, when you look at these, the glue stick only, let's see here, it only goes to there, and that's the plastic piece. So you're getting this much glue in a glue stick. That's sad. Okay, so we have 2 quilt sandwiches right here, and we're going to start quilting on our main panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this air erasing sew line, and I think this was something that was in our sew sampler box at one time. I'm not sure when, but I have it. And so this is going to disappear with air. So if I mark this, I need to use it pretty quickly, because sometimes these disappear quickly, sometimes it takes them a while to disappear, but I'm going to get it quilted right away. So I'm thinking what I did with my other one. I think I took and did a line. So here's what I did on my first one. I think I lined it up right here. Yep, I went with a line that went right here because it went through this bag and on this angle and right here on this. So I think I'm going to do something similar, kind of get the same angle. These are, I believe, 1-inch square pieces, or 3/4 inch squares. Those are 3/4 inch squares quilting. I wanted to do something small since this is a small project, and I just think it looks pretty with a smaller and tighter quilt pattern. So I just did it smaller. So let's see. I am going to try to keep about that same angle so they'll look nice grouped together. And so what I can do is I can lay this on here, and this one was right around here, and it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just taking that line that I did on the other one. And then this one would have been up here somewhere. And so let's see what that looks like. And it may be close to this angle right here, and if so, we can use that one. So that is that. Yeah, it's the same angle as that bird tail. So I'm just going to use that bird, not actually the tail, but the back end of the bird. So right there. And I'm just lining my ruler up so it's that same angle. And that way, these will be very similar when they're hanging. And so all I'm going to do is I am just going to mark on the stocking and the fabric on the top. I am not going to be quilting this part right here. It's there just to keep, you know, I'll start on it and then go over. It's there just to keep it in place and everything squared up. But if you wanted to quilt on this, you certainly could, and then you'd have this quilted piece right here that maybe you could make something with it, and the other quilted piece. But I am just going to quilt on the stocking itself. So let's see, we've got one line, and I'm just going to do one line going in each direction. And then I did a perpendicular line for the other one. So I took a line on my ruler and I lined it up with that. And so I'm just going to move it down here just a little bit. And it doesn't matter where it's at. And I think I am going to, and I'm looking, it's going to be the same angle as these leaves. So I'm just going to use that leaf right there and make sure that it's on this line too. That leaf line. Perfect. And so all I'm going to have is 2 lines, one going in each direction. Okay, so I've got you moved down just a little closer and you can see the lines right here and right here. And you can see that I followed that angle and I followed this angle too. And these 2 lines are perpendicular. And that's just if you want to do the same pattern that I'm using. And so this foot right here is one that I had purchased with a set. And it has grid lines. And so what I'm using is this outside line here and this outside line here. And then my needle is right in the middle. And so when I use that, that is 3/4 squares. And so that's what I'm using. Now, if I wanted to use my walking foot, I could use my walking foot, but I really don't want to. This has a guide on it. And it works really nice as well. But I think I'm just going to use my regular foot right here. This worked really well on the Santa one. So if you have any kind of guide on your needle, or you have a walking foot or a foot that has guidelines on it like this, they work really well and you don't have to mark your whole piece. And I'm just marking the first line. And then what I'll do is I will sew on that line first. Then I'll go and sew with that line that I have drawn and now stitched on and match it up with this, whoops, and match it up, make sure you guys can see, match it up with that line here and just sew. And as I sew, keep that on the line, just like that, okay? And the same thing over here. Once I've got it sewn on this line, then this will be my guide, and then the next stitch will be my next guide, and so forth. So I'm going to go and I am going to stitch and do straight line quilting on this. I usually increase my stitch by a little bit just because this is thicker, and I like to have quilting stitches that are a little bit larger. So I'll increase mine just a little bit. We go right through any applique, that is fine. On Santa, you know, whenever you're doing the face, you can go right through his nose and all of that. That will be fine too. So let me go ahead and get this quilted, and I'll bring you back when I've got both pieces done. Now for the backing of the stocking, I am not going to make my quilting as tight. I'm going to make it looser because we're not going to be seeing this side very often, and it'll just save me time as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I am going to draw a line, oh, probably about that angle right there. And I am going to be making these lines probably 2.5 to 3.5, or 2.5 to 3 inches wide. Let's see, if it were 3 inches, it would go over here. I think I'll do 2.5. Now, because my foot that I've been using does not go that far, I am going to have to draw the lines on this. So I will do that real quickly. And so what I'll do is just measure 2.5 away and put my line that I've drawn on that 2.5 inch line, and then just mark it with my air erase pen, and I will keep going. Okay, I've got those on. Now I'm going to do a line that is perpendicular to the lines that I've been making. And I can do that by just taking any line on my ruler and lining it up with that line that I've drawn, and they will be perpendicular. Now you don't have to use this angle, you can use any angle you want, but I'll just continue with kind of what I've got on the front. That way these diamonds will be square on point. Okay. All right, and now we have it all gridded out, and I just need to take it to my sewing machine and follow the lines. I would suggest not using friction pins on anything that you're going to see on your quilt, and you are going to see this. Now I'm going to use a white thread for this quilting. On my front of the stocking, I ended up using a thread that matched this, but when you open it up, you can see the lines a little clear. It's okay because again, this is inside, and that's pretty. I think that's pretty. But I'm matching my thread when I quilt to this. And on this one, I'm just going to do a white. I have finished quilting the back portion of the stocking, and I don't know if you can see it real well in the camera. There's kind of a glare there, but the marking pen that I used does disappear pretty quickly. So there's still some marks here and there where I did it darker. So if you use one of those pens, be sure you start sewing right away. Otherwise you won't have any marks when you start sewing. I did have to go back and trace a line or two toward the end when I was sewing because I had lost my line. So this looks fine, and in the inside it also looks good except for pieces of thread and scraps of fuzz. So this one's all finished. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our front panel and we're going to go ahead and cut this one out. Remember, the lines that we drew were the cutting lines. Then there was a dotted line inside that was the sewing line, and we didn't need to mark that because that was just a 1/4 inch distance from that line. So we know that our sewing machines can be set up to sew a 1/4 inch. So let me grab some scissors here. And I am just going to cut this stocking. Now remember, I did stitch on that line, so I am cutting right next to it just to make sure I still have that little stitch line there. That's just locking those stitches down. And then I think I'm just going to use a straight rotary cutter on this. I'll get the curved part with scissors. And you do want to cut nice and smoothly because that is going to be the edge in which your machine foot is going to follow. And so if that's not a nice smooth line, your stitches may not be nice and smooth. And that's a pretty gentle corner right here, which will be nice to bind. So let me just take this now and lay my straight edge on it, and I can trim that. It's looking good. It's starting to take shape. Okay, and you can go ahead and get rid of this. And we just have this little top piece right here. Okay, this is all cut out. Now I'm going to get my backing piece and bring it over. So with the backing piece, we need to make sure that it is this ticking stripe here, this fabric that you want on the back of your stocking is on the bottom and it's facing down. And then your stocking is going to go on your inside fabric side, and that way both sides have the inside fabric. Now, once you have it here, just center it the way you like. And since I've got these cross hatch stitching, I just kind of want to keep those straight and in line too. And so I'll be cutting off all of this. And so I think I'm going to put a couple pins in it. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to trace around it and then cut it out. So I'm just needing a couple pins to hold it. This time I'm going to use a friction pin because a friction pin won't be seen if it comes back on the outside edges. That's going to be hidden in the seam line. So we are just going to go and trace all the way around this stocking. And remember, this is the way it's going to be together. So be sure you have it, the inside fabric together. They should be touching. Your panel should be facing out, and your back piece of fabric should be facing out the other way. Just want to make sure my pin is marking. And just try to be as straight as you can. Again, that's going to be your cutting line. And we'll be using a straight edge on this again as well. Make sure I'm marking, yep. Okay, that is done. Now we're going to take our stocking off, and I'm just going to make sure it's all the way around. Yep. And let's set the stocking aside. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to cut this fabric out. Now, if you wanted to, you could go around with a stay stitch and that would be fine. And you could do it right inside this line. But since we're going to be putting this right together, I am not going to do that since this is ready to be installed into our stocking. I will just real quickly cut this, and we're going to be sewing it together right away. And again, that line is your cut line. And I tend to cut just right on the outside of it, just right next to it on the outside. That way I can trim down if I need to. But you can't add fabric back unless you're a quilter and you stitch it back. Okay, just get past this gentle corner right here, and then we'll use our rotary cutter. Now, I told you that I was going to share with you the measurements for the Santa block, the tree block, and Mrs. Claus block, and I will do that at the end of this video. Also, I will have a little sketch or something to kind of show you the pieces that I added to those blocks and kind of give you some measurements. But that will be right after we finish this. That way, if you're making those and want to turn those into stockings, you can have that information too. Okay. Sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking cutting these pieces off because you think, what if I've misdrawn? But I guess we could always just sew it again. Okay, so here's our stocking back. Now with the inside fabric together and your panel facing out and your background fabric facing out, we are just going to sandwich these together. And I am going to put some clips around. You can also use pins. Pins are fine. These just work pretty nicely for this. And I think I found these. Some of these are the actual Wonder clips. Some of them are by Clover, and some of them are clips that I just bought off of Amazon, and they were just a knockoff brand. I think the Clover and the Wonder clips, the real ones, might be just a little bit better quality. They seem to be a little tighter maybe, but they all work just fine. And then I also have these nice big ones, like I make bags or purses or something, and these are really nice for larger pieces or thicker pieces. And we're just going to go all the way around just to hold it together. And I'm going to take this now to the machine, and I am going to stitch with a basting stitch right up next to that edge. So like 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, all the way around, except for the top. We've got to leave that top open. So I'll bring you back once I have that stitched. And there we have it, so that we can now take off our clips and our pins. It is all pieced together, and so we can see that it's a big stocking. Now we're ready to put the binding on. So the way I showed you how to quilt it and the way we cut it out and we stitched around the edge, I don't believe that is in Tilda's directions, but that's the way I like to do it. From my experience with working with quilted items like this, it seems to be the best that I found. You might have another way of doing it, and that's great, but that's just the way I like to do it. So now what we're going to do is put the binding on. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, what she says is that basically just you're going to bind this, and you're going to use 2.5 inch binding, and then of course fold it in half and stuff. But she doesn't go really into detail on how to do that. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through that, and we're going to use the sewing machine method of putting on our binding. If you like to do hand binding, hand stitch on your binding, that will be great. You're going to put yours on the top and then flip it over and hand stitch it on the bottom. But because I use the sewing machine, we are going to be stitching it to the back, and then we're going to bring it forward and stitch it to the front with the sewing machine. Now, another thing that she has us do is she has us put the binding up here first, and then she has you leave some of the binding overhanging up here and go around and leave some here, and then tuck the binding inside and hand stitch it down. And then you're also going to be putting your hook in there by hand stitching, your little loop of fabric by hand stitching it. And I really don't like that either. And so when I made the Santa Claus block, the Santa Claus stocking, when I made that, what I did is I put the side binding on and all around the foot, and then I added the top. Now, when you do that, that does pinch it in a little bit at the top. And there's so many thicknesses. It is a little bit thick here, and if you look at it, it goes together kind of just a little bit like this into the top there, but it's all finished. Everywhere around it, it's finished, and your hanger is also enclosed in the binding. And so that's the way I'm going to show you how to do it. I think there are probably ways that you could get around doing that a different way, but this is the way that was the quickest and easiest for me. If you make bags and things like that, you may have another idea, and you could leave that in the comment box below. But I didn't care for just pushing this binding up here and sticking it down and then hand stitching it. It's also going to be bulky in there, and it's the little hook is just hand stitched in there too, and I just don't think I like that as well. So this is the way I'm going to show you how to make it. If you don't like it this way and you want to do it like Tilda does, by all means follow those directions. But here's how I'm going to do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my binding. Now she calls for 2.5 inch binding, and she says regular binding should work just fine. I went ahead and made bias binding because I know how frustrating curves can be when you're putting on regular cut binding. Even though these aren't that big of curves, she says they're gentle enough curves, I know that you get puckers. So I went ahead and I made bias binding out of a fat quarter of fabric. And a fat quarter of fabric gives you just plenty to make one stocking. You're going to have leftovers, but you can always use that for something else, especially like if you like to do scrappy bindings on quilts. So I went ahead and made my bias binding. If you want to see how I make it using a fat quarter of fabric, I will put the link of the video in the description box below, and that way you can see how to do bias binding with a fat quarter of fabric. And it's really nice and easy, and it works up very quickly, and that's what I did. And I'm going to use the same color on all 4 of my stockings just because I want them to kind of be cohesive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our binding, and all I did was I folded it in half, just like that, and pressed, okay? So we are going to start on one end, and it doesn't matter which end you start on. I am going to be starting at the top. Let's see. How about we just start right up here? And again, I am doing this with the machine, so I'm putting it on the back first. If you're wanting to hand stitch it, put it on the top first. And so what I'm going to do, and I don't even normally pin this down, I will just kind of put a few clips to get me started, and then I'll just kind of hold it in place as I sew. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to my machine, and I'm going to go a little more than 1/4 inch just because I want to make sure I get all the layers in. And since this is different than a quilt, you know, with clothing, it's a different size seam allowance, and this is between clothing and a quilt. So we're going to make it probably more like 3/8 of an inch, between 1/4 inch and 1/2 of an inch. And if you want to do it 1/2 inch, that's fine. You're just going to have a little less of your stocking showing on the fabric, and it won't make any difference. And you can see this is put on using 1/4 inch or a little bit more, 3/8 of an inch, and it wrapped around just fine on the back. You can see how it lays, and you can see on the corners it just laid, well, I guess not the corners, but the curved edges, it just laid very nicely, and it was able to sew in without any puckers or anything like that. And you do want to go slow. You want to take your time, especially around the corners. Even though you're using bias binding, take your time. There's no rush. Just let the bias binding follow that edge. So as you're going, just keep that edge of the bias binding. Just give it a little pull on the corners so that it fits, just like that. And just keep working it around. That's why I don't pin it, because you're going to be manipulating it as you go. So I will take this to the sewing machine and I'll attach it all the way around. And when I get to this end, I'll just leave a little bit up here. It doesn't matter that we're going to, how much to leave, because we're going to trim it off even anyway. And then we're going to add a bias binding top here too. And this doesn't have to be bias binding. This can be regular, but you're going to have plenty of bias binding. So you just use what you have. And I will be right back. All right, I now have all of this sewn down, and you're going to notice at the corners, wherever there's a corner or a curve, it's kind of lifting up, and that's fine. It's perfectly flat where the stitch is, but just because we stretch it on these corners a little bit, it just wants to stand up, and so that is perfectly normal. Okay, make sure you can see. And then of course the top, I just left some hanging over just a little bit. We'll be trimming that off here in a minute. So now we're gonna flip this, but before we do, I'm gonna give it a press. So I've got my pressing mat here in my iron. And what I like to do is just press it out away from the stocking. And that will help make it so there's no little puckers in that binding. And on this right here, I'm just going to go ahead and flip it back because it's just wanting to pop back up. So it holds really nicely right there. So I'm just going to give that a press like that, and then go around over here, and I'll go ahead and flip this back here too. That will want to just go right over just like that. And I can give that a nice press, just getting any little pleat that's there in the seam line out of there. Pulling it all the way across, just like that. Okay. So now I have all of that pressed, and now let's flip it over. So now that we have it on this side, we need to go ahead and get this glued on. And I do a glue on binding and then I stitch on it. And it works so much better than trying to have pins and clips on this and trying to manage it. Once you get it glued on, you just put your sewing machine on it and it just zips right along. You don't have to manhandle any binding. So I'm just using our regular washable Elmer's glue, and this time, since this fabric is nice and dark, I'm not worried about it seeing through or anything because it will not show if it does turn purple. So I'm just putting it on that seam allowance portion right there, and let me bring you down a little bit. So I'm just putting it right here along the seam allowance, and I can probably get this whole straight edge here done and ironed at one time. Okay, then what I'm doing is taking it, and I am going to take my binding and I'm just going to overlap it just a little bit over the seam that I made when I attached it. Okay, and then I'm just pressing it down. You want to go over that seam just a little bit because you're going to stitch on that side of the seam. That way your stitch is going to not be on the binding on the other side. It will be on the background fabric of your stocking and you won't see it. In a perfect world, it would be right in the ditch in the background or in the back here, but that's really hard to get. Some people can. I'm not that perfect yet. Maybe someday. Okay, so I have that much done. Now we're going to go down here, and again, I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue over here. Even though that wants to hold itself together pretty well, this glue will keep it from moving. And I'm just going to go all the way across here, and again pull it across that seam line that you made when you were attaching. It's pretty much the perfect length, so I really don't have to pull any, and I did it just a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch for my seam allowance when I attached it. So now we're going to go over here, and I'm going to pull that back just a little bit. Whoops, and there I get it on my stocking. I didn't mean to do that. Oh, and I want to tell you, whenever I iron, I still smell chocolate from the other glue. It smells quite good. Maybe they need to make a glue stick for quilters that has a good scent. But that would go over well. And just working that around. And we're just about there. And if I do get glue that sticks out past the binding, I can take a damp cloth and easily wipe it away. And if you see any place that you want to redo, it pops right off. Put some new glue on it, pull it, and press again. Very friendly. Okay, so it is now glued all around. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I am going to sew about 1/8 of an inch away from this edge in here. And there we have all of the binding on, and I think it looks really nice all the way around. So let's go ahead and trim off these pieces right here that are hanging over. Just cut them flush with the stocking. And oh, I was going to show you the back of this too. And you can't even see, you know, where your stitching is. It's on there, but it blends in. I used red thread. It blends in nicely with the red, and it looks great on the back too. So the next thing we want to do is we need to add our binding up here. And so we are also going to be adding the hanging loop at the same time when we're adding our binding. So let's get that made first. And you just need to take about a 2x8 piece of fabric, and we are just going to fold it in half like we do bias binding, or like we do any binding. And then we're going to fold it to the center like that and press it like this. Then we're going to do the other side the same way, bringing it to the middle and pressing it. And then once you have both of those sides brought to the middle, we are just going to give it a press so that it lays flat. If I can do this. Okay. It's kind of hot. It's a short piece. Usually when it's longer, you have a little more area to hold on to. So you got to get your fingers right up next to that heat there. Okay, and then once you have it folded in half like that, we're just going to fold it in half again. Ooh, and that's hot. This mat holds that heat in. And we're just going to press just like this. Okay. Now, if I can touch it, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch on this edge right here. And Tilda just says to stitch on the open end. I like to go ahead and stitch on the other end, so I'll just stitch all around it and right up next to the edge. So it's just a top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And here I have our loop all sewn on both sides, and we have raw edges at the end, and that's fine because we're going to be tucking those into our binding. So let's go ahead and figure out what we need here. So we have a lot of fabric in both of these ends right here with the seam allowance and the binding on both of them. That's really a thick spot. And so we're going to try to flatten that out just a little bit so it'll be easier to maneuver our machine over it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to flatten that seam allowance so that part of it goes this way and part of it goes that way. And really the seam allowance is hard to flatten because we did do that close stitch, but if you have anything that hangs over from that close stitch, split it up. And then on your binding, try to put part of your binding on this side, part of it on this side, because that way when we sew our binding on, it will not, and I think I'm just going to pin it on the front here like this. You don't want your binding going back or toward the front. You want it to just be right flat and on both sides. So I'm just going to put a pin right there, and that's about 1 inch to 1/2 inch down, and that way when I sew on it 1/4 of an inch away, it won't interfere in my presser foot. And I'll do the same thing over here. Press this binding so that it's split up on both sides of that seam. It just takes a little pressure. And then put a sturdy pin 1 inch to 1.5 inches down below it. Whoops. See if I can get my hands to work here. Just like that. Okay, now we can still sew. This pin head might be in the way. Let me move it down. Okay, so we can still sew without moving this pin. Then we're going to put our loop, and this is the hillside, right here's the hill. So we need to put this loop, I like to cross it, you can put it however you like, but I like to cross it, and then I like it to have the, to kind of be, I guess, the wider end in the back here. So I'm going to be putting it so it hangs like that, okay? Like that. Now, we aren't going to let it hang out right now because we're going to be putting it into our binding. And so what we need to do is put it upside down. And when I do, I'm going to split these two ends, and this is about 1/4 of an inch away. I'm going to have it so that part of the tail is on this side of that middle seam and part of the other tail is on this side. That way we don't have to go through this bulk on top of that seam allowance. So that's just a little trick to keep your machine from having to overdo it. And again, I'm just going to put a pin right here and a pin right here. And do you see what I mean? When I stitch, I will be stitching up here, and there won't be additional bulk right here where all of this is. We're just trying to spread that bulk out. And you'll see why when your sewing machine goes over that. If you have a heavy duty machine like I have, mine's a Juki, and it's a good machine. It will take a lot of layers and lots of jean layers too. But if yours isn't very good at going through thick things, you're going to have to go really slow. And I am using a quilting needle, and you can use whatever kind works on your machine for lots of fabric, but mine, I just usually have a quilting needle on there, and it is a 7511. So use a sturdy needle. You might even try a jeans needle if yours is having difficulty, but it is going to be a lot of bulk there. Then we're going to be stitching from the inside, and we're going to be putting our binding in, and then we're going to be flipping our binding. So if we're gonna have it flip over, and we're gonna do the same thing with the machine sewing on the top here. Now, if you want to do yours where you hand stitch it inside, you can do that. So if you have a machine that does not have the base that removes, where you can put tubes and sleeves and stockings and stuff and have a nice layer to sew on, if your machine does not have that removable part on it, then you might prefer to just stitch it on the top and then flip it in and around to hand sew. It's whatever your preference is. So mine has the portion that pulls out so that I have a smaller, narrower piece that I can put inside here and stitch real easily here. Now when it comes to this side, I am going to have to hold my fabric back like this, and just as I move and go around, I'll maneuver my stocking, and I will just open it up like this and keep going around. It is something you want to do slow. Do not rush it. There's no need to rush it. So I'm going to start about a quarter of a distance. This is 1/4, this is 3/4 from the edge, and this is just my tail. I'm actually going to start sewing down here a quarter of the way from this edge. So I'll start sewing here. I'll bring it all around and keep going, and just maneuver this as I go, just like this, and go all the way until I reach back to this side. But I'm just going to stop about here. I'm just going to get to this side of the fabric, this back portion, and stop. Then I'm going to have 2 tails, and we're going to join our binding together. So if you are familiar with binding a quilt, you know that when you bind, you have 2 tails, you put those 2 tails together, and then you finish your binding, attaching your binding to your quilt. Same thing here. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to go real slow, and I am going to make sure that I sew a 1/4 of an inch all the way around until I get to here, and then I'm going to have a big gap. All right, let's see what we got here. So here is my tail here, and then here is my tail here, and this one's long, and we'll trim it down here in a minute. Let's look at how we flattened out. So do you see how that's been flattened out right there? And this one right here has been flattened out also, because we don't want them to go back, or we don't want them to go forward. We want them to go both directions, okay? So now when we pull this around, you can kind of see what it's going to look like. And then when we pull this around here, our hanging loop right here is going to be tucked in, no raw edges, and it's going to look good. Okay, so let's join our binding strips, and we're going to do this the same way we do with any kind of quilt. And I'm just tucking that in to get it out of our way. I am going to overlap this long tail right here, and I'm going to cut just an inch or 2 off here. Not 2 inches, probably 1 inch to 1.25 inches, and just make it a nice straight cut. Okay, now this piece that you cut off, we can use as a measuring tool, and when we open it up, it is the thickness of our binding, and that's how much overlap we need. So if I lay this tail down right here. Let me bring you down just a little bit. Okay, that should be better. So if I bring this tail right here is laying here, and I'm going to bring this long tail on top of it, just like so. I am going to decide where I want to cut. Now, I usually like to have it right here in the middle, so I think I am going to put this right here where I want to match them up, right in the middle. And on one edge, I am going to trim this top one. So this is the same length. It's right there at that same edge right there. I don't think you can see it because the colors are different, but both of those two are right edge to edge, okay? Then I'm going to flip this one over and bring it to the top. And I can match up this edge still with this one behind here. And I need to shorten this one by this much. And I usually like to take an extra thickness off, and I'm going to go about a nickel's thickness further in, because usually there's a little bit of stretch to our binding, and this way it'll match up nicely. Okay, so now I have it would be 2.5 inch overlap, but I've taken off about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so then I'm just going to turn it this way, because usually I'm at my sewing machine when I do this. So I'm going to take my fingers, and I am going to see if I can get my fingers in there. So I'll put my fingers here on this side and my fingers here on this side, and I got my thumbs up, and I'm going to lay this one like this one like this. So my thumbs up, my thumbs down, and there we have it. So now what I want to do, and I can pinch this together so I have a little more room, I'm going to put a pin so that this corner right here and these edges are all matched up right here. And I can put a pin right down here. Now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from this corner to this corner, just a straight line. Now, if I did it correctly, let me move my pins out of here. When I pull this, it should lay flat, and it does. So now I can cut this excess triangle off, and I can just cut 1/4 of an inch away from that seam right there. Just like that. And then I can finger press that open so we can reduce some of the bulk there. And then close it back up by pulling on it. And now I can put a pin right here, and I can go back to the sewing machine, and I can back stitch and just kind of over stitch where I had the stitches there, go all the way down here, go ahead and go about 1 inch beyond where I ended my stitching there, and then back stitch so I've got it all locked in, and then I'll bring you back. Okay, let's open it up and see how we did. So we're going to pull our loop out, we're going to pull all of our binding out, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a press just like we do on the quilts, just so that we don't have any pleats there in our binding. And when I come to the edges here, I'm just going to do this, press that down, press, And since we have our loop there, I'm going to pull that up and press that too. Okay. Now we get to flip it over. And I did notice some of my loops are a little bit, edges are sticking right there, so I can trim that down. I think this one's okay. So if you see anything sticking out, just trim it down so you don't have that bulk in your binding there. And so now we're just gonna flip it all the way around. Just like that. Let's pull this one over a little longer. Okay, now we can press it and then just pin it like we, like a lot of people do, but I'm gonna go ahead and do the glue basting on this again, just because I know it holds it down a little bit better. So I'm gonna take my glue and I'm going to go right there on the top of the stocking. And I'm gonna fold this down. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I fold it. I like to have as much showing as possible, really. So I'm just gonna fold it all the way. But make sure it's even. I think I'm going to trim this right here. This one's sticking up just a little bit proud. Yeah, that helps. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue here. And I'm going to go ahead and press that one. Because there's a little more pull on that, I'll put a clip on it right now while it's cooling. And then I'm going to check this one over here. If there's anything sticking up, go ahead and trim it down. There we go. Put a little glue over here. Watch our fingers. Put another clip right there while it cools. And then this is probably dry. So let's get that now. And I want to keep it even, so if these two edges have that much, I will try to make it so it's the same as those two edges. That looks pretty good. And I'm gonna add a little steam because that sometimes will take that dried glue and it will moisten it up and it will get it to stick. Okay, so I've got that side. And this side should go together pretty easy. Get all the lint off of there. And this is the side you're gonna see. So you'll want to have it looking pretty good. Okay, I think that's probably dried. Now I am going to go ahead and I'm going to cross these back behind there, because when I sew this binding, I'm going to be sewing over this just a little bit. because I'm gonna let it hang down just a little bit. And that way, that will be a nice secure tag. It's got several stitches in it already. So just pin it on. And I'm ready to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to do an edge stitch again, top stitch, just like we did on our regular binding, and then I'll bring you back. And there it is, all finished. We have it completed on both sides. It looks nice inside and on the outside. Again, these do fold in right here a little bit, but I think it looks fine. And there's the whole thing. Maybe I could make it back up just a little bit. So there we have our completed winter bird Christmas stocking, and I'm thinking it looks really, really pretty. Let me grab Santa. So here is Santa right here, and he is just a little bit wider, just like I was saying. And so let me see if my feet ended up being about the same size. They're pretty close. So what I did when I made Santa is I ended up, because we cut Santa, you know, that block was right here, and I kind of wanted him to be away from the edges of the binding. I didn't want to get this all covered up with binding. So I ended up adding, I believe, let's see, a 1-inch strip here and a 1-inch strip here. And when that was added, I had a 3/4 inch hangover. And then that's where the binding was attached. Up here, I didn't have to add anything because he already had this piece on him. But down here, for this section here, I added, let's see here, 5 by 11 1/4 inch piece right here. And then I added a 5 by 10 1/4 inch piece here. And I'll have these measurements in the description box below. I'll actually make a PDF so that you can just print it off, but I'll have these measurements in that. And then for Mrs. Claus, she and Mr. Claus were about the same size, but she was actually more on this side of the block. So I ended up just adding one piece right here and to make her the same size as Santa. And this piece is 1 1/4 inches. And so when it's sewn in like this, we have 1 inch hanging over, and that makes her the same size as Santa there. I also added up here, well, actually I didn't add this. This was in the pattern already. I just hadn't put it on earlier because I wasn't sure if I was going to be using it. And I did need that piece. So that's on the actual Mrs. Claus pattern. But down here, I used the same measurements I did for Santa, a 5 by 11 1/4 and a 5 by 10 1/4. Okay. Then on the tree, and this is the one I was getting ready to quilt. On this one, let me find my measurements here. The only thing I had to add on this one was this 1 1/2 inch strip, because it is the exact same size as the winter birds. So just add 1 1/2 inch strip here, and then you'll do it the exact same way that we just did winter birds. The same pieces down here and over here as winter birds, okay? Now, the winter birds and the tree, I used the template that was in the download, the free pattern download. For Mrs. Claus and Santa, I made it just a little bit larger, because if you'll notice here, when we put this here, we have, let me put this over here. When we put this stocking right here, we have an overhang over here. So I enlarged this stocking, and I just used some tissue paper, and I just added a little bit all around it. I didn't put it all right here. I added a little bit all around, and that way when it went in place here, it was evenly distributed, okay? So it's about adding, it looks like I added probably a 1/4 inch all the way around. And you can just take a piece of tissue paper, or any piece of paper actually, and just trace this on and then go a 1/4 inch around that, and that would work. And it doesn't have to be exact or anything, because you know when you're sewing it, sometimes our stitches get off and so it doesn't get it exact. But this is definitely wider than this stocking, so you did need to adjust that. And that's the same thing on the Santa block too. Both Mrs. Claus and Santa will be the same size. So once she has her binding on, it is the same size as Santa. These other ones are just a teeny tiny bit smaller and no one will notice. So there we have our winter bird stocking. And here is Santa, and they are going to look beautiful hanging off of our mantle. I am so excited, and Andy is too. He is thinking we're going to be having lots of stuff in our stockings this year. In fact, he was wrapping stuff to put in the stockings this evening. So he's excited he's going to have lots of gifts in his stocking. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you get a chance to try some of Tilda's free patterns. They are just so pretty, and I just love this Merry Little Christmas fabric. It is so pretty. I wish that she would put it out again next year, but I don't think she's going to do that for our area. She may just be doing it for her local area. But it is certainly beautiful. And she may have something similar next year. You never know, knowing that she just really sold this so well. But these were really fun to make, and I hope you liked them. So here are all of our beautiful patterns, and there's just not enough room in the camera lens here to get them all in. They're going to look stunning on the mantle, and I can't wait to get them finished. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate that. Also, don't forget to like and share and even comment. All of those things help my channel to grow so that more people can learn from my tutorials and have access to these free patterns. I really enjoy doing this for you, and all of your kind comments encourage me to make more. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great week, and as always, I hope to see you back here next time. Bye-bye.